"Please, don't look at me," she whispered. But the rancher lifted her chin. The desert evening burned itself into ash. Heat bled away into a shiver of cold, and the wind carried sand that scraped against skin like glass. James Calder's horse snorted as he pulled the reins, his eyes narrowing on the broken figure ahead. At first he thought it a mirage, a body crumpled near the rocks, pale cloth torn by the wind. But the closer he rode, the clearer the truth became. Someone had left a woman here to die. He swung down, boots sinking into the dust. The woman stirred, lifting her head with effort. Dirt clung to her cheeks and her lips were cracked, whispering words that nearly vanished into the wind. "Please, don't look at me." James froze, not because of the words but the way she said them, like a prayer meant to ward off shame. He crouched low, careful not to crowd her. In the dying light he could see her hands trembling, her hair tangled and matted against her face. Whoever she was, she carried a terror deeper than thirst or hunger. He offered his canteen, but she hesitated, as if even water might bind her to him. At last she drank, eyes shut tight, her throat working as though swallowing fire. When she tried to pull away, the weight of exhaustion dragged her forward, and James caught her before she hit the ground. Her head rested against his shoulder. But still she whispered, broken and fierce, "Don't!" Look, he wanted to ask why. He wanted to demand who had hurt her, who had left her in the desert's grasp. But James Calder was a man who knew silence had power. So he lifted her gently into his saddle and swung up behind, his arm steadying her as the horse started forward. The desert stretched endless, its shadows lengthening. And as the stars cut through the twilight, one thought pressed against his chest like a blade. What kind of wound would make a woman fear even being seen? And if she had been left out here to die? Did that mean someone might be coming back to finish the job? James brought Marybeth to his ranch under a sky heavy with stars, the silence of the prairie broken only by coyotes calling far away. The lantern light spilling from the porch felt like a promise of safety, but she flinched as though even its glow revealed too much. He guided her inside, the wooden boards creaking under their weight, and set her near the hearth. The fire crackled to life, its warmth pushing back the chill that clung to her skin. James fetched clean water, cloth, and a jar of salve his late mother had once used for burns. He worked without words, dipping the cloth, wringing it out, then passing it gently over the cuts on her arms. She winced but didn't pull away. Her face remained turned from him, hair falling like a curtain, as if the simple act of being seen was a punishment. He thought of his own past, how grief had made him close doors, cover mirrors, and keep his eyes fixed on work rather than faces. Maybe, he realized, shame could look the same as mourning. The night deepened, coyotes fading into stillness. Marybeth whispered once, barely audible over the fire. "You should have left me." James paused, cloth in his hand. "That's not who I am." Her breath hitched, as though she'd forgotten men could answer gently. Still, she pulled the blanket higher, hiding half her face. The next day unfolded with a kind of uneasy rhythm. James tended the horses, mended a fence. Marybeth moved quietly through the rooms, her steps soft as though afraid to leave traces. He found her sweeping the porch with one of his old brooms, her hands trembling yet stubborn. It wasn't gratitude, more like defiance. She refused to be useless, even here. By evening, when James set bread and beans on the table, she sat across from him in silence. She barely ate, yet when she saw him glance at the untouched plate, she whispered, "It's enough." "Thank you." Outside, the wind shifted. The horses in the corral tossed their heads uneasy. James's eyes narrowed toward the horizon. Tracks had been cut into the dust that morning, faint but fresh. Someone had passed too close to the ranch. If Marybeth had been abandoned, it seemed abandonment wasn't the end of her story. The sun rose pale and harsh, turning the horizon into molten copper. James rode the fence line at dawn, eyes searching the dust for what he already knew he'd find. Hoof prints, not his own. Too many, moving in restless arcs as if riders had lingered, watching. When he returned, Marybeth was on the porch, clutching the broom like a weapon. Her hair hid most of her face, but he noticed her shoulders stiffen at the sound of his boots. She had felt it too. Something prowling near, unseen. "You've got someone after you," he said simply. Her grip tightened, knuckles white. Silence stretched until the wind rattled the porch boards. Finally, she whispered, "They don't stop. Not until they've taken everything." James studied her, weighing whether to press for more. But the tremor in her voice told him the truth. Whoever they were, she believed them stronger than dust storms, stronger than the desert itself. That day passed slow, heavy with watchfulness. James worked the barn while Marybeth mended an old torn shirt of his, her stitches uneven yet careful. Once, he caught her humming under her breath, then saw her clamp her lips shut as though joy were forbidden. By nightfall, he'd lit the lanterns around the house, each flame a marker against the dark. Marybeth lingered by the fire, staring at her reflection in the kettle's sheen before quickly turning it away. James wanted to tell her she had nothing to fear from his eyes, but words like that, spoken too soon, could wound deeper than silence. Instead, he offered her his mother's Bible, left on a shelf long untouched. "Help some folks," he said. She traced the cracked leather with cautious fingers, then set it on her lap without opening it. That night, as the ranch grew quiet, James sat awake listening. Every creak of wood, every whisper of wind pressed on his nerves. He thought of the tracks, of her whisper, "They don't stop." Then came the sound, hooves on hard ground. Distant but real. He moved to the window. Torches flickered far off, weaving like fireflies in the black. Marybeth appeared in the doorway, pale in the lantern glow, her voice trembling. "They found me." The storm rolled in before midnight, clouds splitting the sky with veins of lightning. Thunder rattled the rafters and rain swept across the plains in silver sheets. James stood at the window, watching those distant torches vanish in the downpour. Whoever had come close was hidden now, but not gone. Behind him, Marybeth sat rigid by the fire, blanket pulled tight. Each crack of thunder made her flinch, though it wasn't the storm she feared. It was memory. James turned from the window. "You need to tell me." His voice carried the weight of a man who didn't demand often. For a long while, she said nothing. Then, with a trembling breath, she lowered the blanket from her face. The firelight revealed bruises fading yellow along her jaw, scars that spoke of more than just the desert's cruelty. Her eyes, wide and shadowed, locked onto his. "I was married," she whispered. "Married to a man who owned more land than any rancher from here to the river. He owned me, too." Her hands twisted in the blanket. "I ran. He doesn't forgive." James felt something coil in his chest, not pity, not outrage, but the sharp knowledge of what it meant to live under another's cruelty. He'd seen ranch hands beaten for less than defiance, neighbors stripped of dignity by men with power. Still, hearing it in her voice carved it deeper. Marybeth shook her head, tears blurring. "He told me if I ever showed my face, if anyone saw the shame he carved into me, he'd take more than my life. That's why—" Her throat caught. "That's why I begged you not to look." The storm howled around them. James knelt, steadying his voice. "Marybeth, you're not his to hide. Not anymore." Her eyes searched him, desperate and disbelieving, as though safety itself were a trick. Another thunderclap split the night, shaking the windows. She buried her face in her hands. "He's coming. I can feel it." James rose slowly, shoulders squared. He didn't reach for a rifle. Violence was not the answer he'd choose. Instead, he stoked the fire higher, its light spilling bright into the storm-dark house. If the past meant to claim her, it would find James Calder standing in the way. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the land washed clean and glistening. Pools of water shone like mirrors across the prairie, and the air smelled of wet earth and sage. James stepped onto the porch, the boards damp beneath his boots, and breathed in the quiet after the fury. No torches burned on the horizon now, only the hush of a world reset. Behind him, Marybeth lingered in the doorway, the blanket still around her shoulders. Her face was half hidden in the morning light, yet something in her posture had shifted. Less cowering, more waiting. James turned toward her. "You don't have to hide." The words seemed to hang in the air like a second sunrise. Marybeth hesitated, then let the blanket slip, revealing her face fully for the first time. The scars were there, faint lines carved by cruelty, but so was something else. Strength. The kind born of surviving what was meant to break her. Her chin lifted, not by his hand this time, but her own choice. "If he finds me," she whispered, "I don't want to be afraid anymore." James nodded, the brim of his hat catching the new light. "Then you won't be. Not here." For a long moment, silence bound them, neither shame nor pity, just recognition. The ranch lay still, yet the world inside that silence shifted. She was no longer the woman begging not to be seen, and he was no longer the man who lived only for his work. They were two souls who had found one another in the desert's cruel trial, standing on the edge of something neither dared name, but both could feel. Marybeth's hand found the porch rail, fingers curling with quiet resolve. "Then let's begin again," she said, voice steadier than it had ever been. James felt the words settle deep, like rain into thirsty soil. And so, as the prairie glowed gold beneath the dawn, a vow unspoken tied them tighter than any oath, that scars could be faced, that love could rise from ruin, and that sometimes the Wild West did not just take, it gave. Out here, where survival was never promised, perhaps love could be. Out here in the Wild West, scars may last, but love endures longer than the desert sun. If this story stirred something in you, don't just ride on by. Hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell, because the next tale of love and survival may change everything.